We made it!
Hey everybody, welcome to SketchUp Live. My name is Josh. This guy right here is Aaron.
Hey guys.
And we've got a few more people sprinkled around. We got Matt behind the camera, Caroline over there.
Couple jokers on the couches answering questions.
A couple of bums on the couch. And we apologize for the delay there. We're cleaning up some gremlins in the computers. And we got them all, though.
We hope.
Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you for sticking around and being here. This is now a lunch hour SketchUp Live for us.
Aaron's getting a little bit hangry, so we're going to try to speed it up and get going. Today we're talking about terrain in SketchUp, or some modeling techniques that are more free-form that you might find if you're doing some topographic stuff or pulling in big landscapes, working with larger context stuff. So we're going to jump around that topic.
Right, so we're not going to get into necessarily landscape design, anything like that. Our main focus is how to get that terrain geometry into your SketchUp model and use it a little bit.
Yeah.
So we'll hop right in.
Let's do it.
So first thing we're going to do is we're going to use a tool that most of you have probably seen at some point or another. This is the Add Location tool. It's a function of SketchUp Pro. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go to File. This is a brand new model, haven't done anything with it yet. I'm going to go to Geolocation and click Add Location. What that's going to do, it's going to pull up a map. So from this map, I can type in an exact address. I can pan around. I can zoom in and out. I can find exactly the piece of land that I want to grab. So for this one, we're just going to play with a neat stretch of geometry. This is a hill outside of Boulder, Colorado, right near us. We're really using it because it is an exaggerated piece of geometry. It has a road down at the bottom and then big hills going up on either side. So it's going to be a good extreme example of the kind of geometry you could pull in for terrain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this. I'm going to pretend that I want to stick a house right up here, something like that. So I'm going to click Select Region and give you guys a couple tips on how this works. When I click Select Region, of course, I have these handles right here. I can resize this window. One of the things you want to do to get the highest fidelity capture, that is to say the best picture, the best image, and the densest mesh of this geometry, you want to zoom in as far as you can. So I'm zoomed all the way in. This is as far as I can zoom in. Then when I'm in there, to get the most geometry, I'm going to drag this all the way down to the bottom corner and make that window as big as it can get. So this is going to get me the most to work with. This is the like I said, highest resolution imagery I can grab, and it's going to be the densest terrain mesh that I can create. And then again, grabbing as big as I can means I'm going to get the most geometry. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit grab. So that's one of the things that we see, or the questions we've had is, you know, when I grab terrain, it doesn't look this or that. It's not as high quality as I want. One of the things you can do is just this. So if I look at this, I'm going to look at this image real quick. So here's what I pulled in. I'm going to look at this car. So I can tell it's a car. It's not real super high geometry, but I can tell that is a car. So I did this a very similar pull of geometry. If I come here and I jump to this other model, you can see I pulled a much bigger section of land. So if I zoom in on that same spot, here's that same car. You can't really even tell what it is. So side by side, you can see the difference. The more zoomed in I am when I make that grab, the more detail that image is going to have. Same goes for the actual terrain geometry. So if I come up here to File, Geolocation, and I hit Show Terrain, it's going to toggle my layers and show me my terrain layer. When you do a pull from Add Location, it does actually pull in two different things. It pulls in just an image layer, which is this location snapshot, and separately it pulls in a location terrain. You can toggle between them by just going to File, Geolocation, and turning Show Terrain on or off, or you can actually just toggle layers. Same thing. But if I look at this, I'm going to go ahead and change my view here. I'm going to look at just the image. I'm going to turn the textures off, and I'm going to go to Show Hidden Geometry. That's going to show me what my actual mesh looks like. So you can see there's a nice ordered mesh. If I just grab my pencil and draw across here, I can see that one side of that mesh is about 20 feet. So I have about a 20-foot mesh zoomed all the way in. If I go hop back over to my big terrain model, example of this one right here, we'll look at the same thing. We'll zoom all the way out. We'll go to File, Geolocation, Show Terrain. Go ahead and look at just the white again, and then turn on my hidden geometry. So you can see from here, it looks like they're about the same size squares, but remember my grab was only this little tiny section. So if I zoom in here and check the geometry again, that's almost 140 feet. So you can see this is a much larger, much bigger mesh. So I'm gonna have a lot less geometry. So it looks smooth because I'm zoomed way out on the geometry, but if I'm really concerned about something like, I gotta figure backfill inside of a lot or something like that, something that's more dialed in, then I'm going to want to make sure that I zoom in as much as possible because it's going to give me more detail in that mesh to work with. Something to shout out to at this point, we did do a Facebook Live a little ways back with Daniel Tall talking about Placemaker. This is kind of where Placemaker shines. They will get not only that geometric data, but they'll actually get you some high-res imagery, higher than the stock imagery that we pull in right here. So if you do a whole lot of this kind of work where you're grabbing terrain, that sort of thing, then this is absolutely something you want to take a look at, is Placemaker. So that covers the basics and a couple tips on ad location. But obviously that's just the start. From here, I'm going to want to go through and do some kind of maybe editing to this terrain, editing to this mesh. And that's why I'm going to hop over to Mr. Josh Raleigh in his awesome topo shirt.
Oh yeah, it's a good one, good one. Yeah, we'll talk about the Sandbox Tools here, and
we got to address this a little bit. This is a man who dresses for the occasion.
I had to wear this today. Yeah, we got some topo lines there.
Sorry for the derail. Back on topic.
All right, so we're going to talk about the Sandbox Tools in SketchUp, and if you have never heard of those, they are actually a native tool set. And I'm on Mac, of course. It'll be a little bit different on Windows, but to find the Sandbox Tools, you go to View, Tool Palettes, and Sandbox. And of course on Windows you'll have some check boxes there with your trays, but that's where it is on the Mac. And it is this lineup of tools there. So I'll just cruise down the line and we'll talk about each one. So this is, as you can see, very similar geolocation import that Aaron was dealing with. So I'm kind of going to use the same spot there. And the very first tool on this tool set here, I'm going to hover over it, it'll say from contours. So of course Aaron brought in the terrain and the satellite imagery with the geolocation, but we don't have actual contour lines here. We could if we had a DWG CAD import that had you know, all the contour lines and then a vertical separation of those. But to get those, it's actually pretty easy to get those from a terrain like this. So what we can do here, if you look in the back here, I've already done it, but I'll show it as well. So I'll go to X-ray mode real quick. You can see there's the topography inside a bunch of sliced planes here that will slice the topography. So I'll jump back over to this terrain and we'll do that. So what I'm going to do is just take a simple rectangle here and copy this to the top of the terrain. So I'm just going to hold shift and lock it over there. And then now I'm going to type in a number and then the slash key. So let's try 20 divide or backslash key. And there's a potential I guess topo line interval there I could use. Let's try a 40 divide enter. Looks a little bit better, so I'm defining where each of those contour lines will hit in vertical space there. So again, I'll go to X-ray mode. You can see there's that topography kind of hiding in there. So all I have to do is get a good view here for a selection, and I'm going to select all this stuff. So all 40 of those planes are going to slice into this 3D terrain with a right click intersect with selection. But before I do that, I'm going to go to File Save. Just a good time to do a file save before any Sandbox tool stuff, because SketchUp with the Sandbox tools is often doing a lot of stuff all at once. It's grabbing information from a lot of polygons and vertices, so it's kind of the nature of the beast.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but we're not exactly batting 1,000 a day, so probably not a bad day to make sure do a little extra save.
Yeah, there's more gremlins cruising around, so we'll do file save. So I'm going to right click on all that stuff and then go to intersect faces with selection. It's going to take a few seconds, but you're going to see, as you can see on the right there, it's already done on this side. So what I can do now is just delete these one by one, and you can see we'll get revealed. Those lines are starting to appear there.
And this is a cool process. I've actually done this process before to create slices for other things, like if you're laser cutting something out of cardboard, you want to create those successive slices and that kind of thing, you can actually use this exact same process to create those layers for other geometry as well.
Yeah, so I'm just going to delete all these. And I grouped the planes before I did this because it's a bit easier to delete them when they're grouped. Otherwise, it would be a face and a couple of lines. So it's a little bit easier to do that. And go ahead, Aaron, answer that if you want.
Yeah, we just had a question come in about asking about where the data comes from when we do those add location steps we just showed. Right now we're using OpenStreetMaps. We were using with Google for a while, but Google closed down their API. We can't actually use that anymore. So we're using OpenStreetMaps, and that's where we're getting the data and that imagery from.
Yeah, so you can see here with that resulting intersect faces operation there, we've got a bunch of contour lines now. So we kind of went backwards. If we didn't have those contour lines and we wanted them, the reason I'm doing this is to show you what to do if you have only the contour lines. So I'm going to delete, let's see, let's delete that and delete that.
And those are those original layers that had the add location geometry, correct?
Yeah. So now let's just pretend that we started with this information. So this is a common workflow that all this stuff here that I'm selecting, it's possible that you may begin with this kind of info, where you're importing a CAD file of some kind and you're starting with these contour lines. So how do you put a surface on top of that? And there's a couple different ways. There's native tools, there's extensions, but we're talking about the Sandbox tools. So let's use the From Contours option here. So again, file save before you do this, just good practice. And then we'll click on From Contours, and SketchUp will do its thing and drape some kind of surface on those contour lines. And what's happening here is, if I zoom in, those contour lines are, I'll turn on hidden geometry. You can see we have some triangulation here. A lot of polygons were created based on the termination of each segment. So each time there's a termination, SketchUp will add polygons and triangles in this case.
So it stitches all those lines together into a mesh.
Yeah. All right, let's go to the next tool. That one is From Scratch, this one here. So with this tool, I can actually draw a grid, ordered grid, kind of like with the line tool. I'm just drawing almost like you have the line tool here, except you're going to be creating a grid. So before you start drawing, you may want to specify the grid spacing. So I'm going to escape this, go back to this tool and show you in the bottom right. Grid spacing is set as 100 feet. So I could change that to something different based on the resolution, I suppose, of the polygon breakdown of my terrain. Right. 100 feet is going to work for me. I'm going to just draw this way. I can hold down Shift just like with the line tool, as I said, and I can draw a grid like that. And the reason you might want this is because we've already given ourselves a bunch of polygons to work with instead of just a surface with 4 edges. Now we have a lot of vertices and polygons to interact with. And that brings up the next tool, which is...
Just real quick, one point on here is if you turn on hidden geometry real quick,
yeah,
these are actually quads, so they're actually squares that are bisected with hidden lines. So that's one of the reasons we use this for terrain and for other places where we're creating smooth geometry is those quads make it easy to automatically create or maintain smooth geometry as you move the geometry around. So yeah, it's imperative to understand that when, or I guess not imperative, it's good to know that, especially going into the next step that Josh is going to show.
Yeah, so this next tool, that'll be important because it's going to utilize all those different pieces of geometry. So if I go to the next tool, it's called the Smooth tool, which is a combination of smooth and move. And I'll jump into this group and go to that tool. And just like with the grid tool, I have the ability to change the radius right away. So 600 feet is what it's set at. Let's just go to maybe 300 feet and see what's happening here. So you can see as I hover around, we'll zoom in there and check it out. When I click, you can see that the yellow dots are a little bit more bold towards the center of that click point, and they kind of get a little bit less intense as you go out. And that's kind of the sort of a proximity sensor, I suppose, where it's going to pull more in the center and less so out towards the boundaries of that radius of influence. So,
which is why you would use smooth rather than move.
Yeah. So you can push-pull the whole terrain like that with one giant circle. And it's pretty fun to change the radius too, because if you go a little bit bigger, you go 800 feet and do a larger, I guess, manipulation of that terrain. And of course, we're not being hyper accurate here, we're just kind of playing around. So it's fun to show this tool because people often don't understand that in SketchUp you can do a lot of this really free-form organic stuff with native tools. So that tool, let's show that tool again on this terrain. Let's go to the monochrome mode, double click in here, turn on hidden geometry, and we'll try that again. So here you can see we can do that on this terrain as well. So let's jump over to the next tool in this tool set, which is stamp. So that is this one right here, stamp. And I've already got a building footprint kind of set up here. So what we can do is stamp a footprint into this 3D terrain. And I'm going to zoom out to about right there and go to File Save real quick. If I click on this tool, always notice in the bottom left, SketchUp is telling you information about that tool. It says select the face to stamp into the mesh. So I'm going to select that footprint. When I do that, I also have a chance again in the bottom right to change what's called an offset. So I can change how much terrain is sort of connected to this footprint. So if I go to 20 feet, you can see in the red there it kind of adjusts, is a lot smaller. Let's try 75, and then we'll click on the mesh. So SketchUp will do its thing, it'll stamp that down, and then as you orbit around, you can decide kind of how that's going to be stamped into the terrain. So it could be higher up, lower down. So it's almost like you're creating a little bit of retaining wall type of terrain there, and you can further, of course, edit that. But it's a pretty quick way to get a footprint going. And then the next tool is the drape tool. So in this case, I'm going to use a 2D trail here. So let's call this a trail that we want to drape down onto our terrain. So I just drew this with the Follow Me tool, and we can drape that onto the terrain below. So pretty similar. I'm going to go to the tool. It's going to tell me select the entities you wish to drape. I'll do a file save real quick. I'm going to select those entities there and drape it down onto the topography below. And let's get rid of that. We don't need that anymore. So you can imagine that that trail perhaps was, or a road, it could be additional CAD information that you brought in from somewhere else. It could be AutoCAD file that you're bringing in, and you're combining that with the topo lines that maybe you got from someone else. And the nice thing about this is if I click into it, let's go back into this mode here. If I wanted to give it a quick color, it's already broken that surface up, so I could drop in a color there. And as you know, with the line tool or other tools, it'd take a while to actually draw that in, so it's a bit faster to drape that 2D stuff onto the 3D terrain. And then I'll really quickly breeze through the next couple of tools here. I rarely use these tools, but I want to show them anyway. Let's get rid of that. This Add Detail tool, so this one here. Let's go to Hidden Geometry real quick, and we'll jump in here. And if I click on this tool, you can see that you're able to add a little more polygons if you just click like that. So I don't use this very much, but you can do that. And then the next one here is Flip Edge, just like it sounds. If I click on this polygon here with that edge in that direction, I can flip it. So it might be useful to try that over on this one. You can see how it actually changes that quite a bit just by flipping that edge. So that could be useful if you're modifying some terrain. And then before we go back to Aaron, I want to show another way to use the drape tool in SketchUp, which is pretty cool. So this one here, this example, I've got this complex loop of edges. So I'm going to select that real quick. I'm going to do a file save before I do From Contours. So From Contours is going to apply a surface here. If I go to Hidden Geometry, you can see that's what we're looking at there. And this may not be the most useful polygon breakdown of this complex edges. So if we had more of a grid, that'd be pretty useful. So kind of a sneaky use of this tool in SketchUp, the drape tool, is I can actually drape a grid down below. So let's move this grid over top of that more complex surface, make sure it's looking good. And I'll move it over this way a little bit. I can drape this down below. So I'm going to click on my file save, go to the drape tool, click on those entities, and then that mesh. So now I'll delete that, turn on Hidden Geometry again. You can see we've got a little bit better polygon breakdown there. So now if I were to go to the Smooth tool and do some smooths here, that's a little bit different treatment of that geometry than it would be if I hadn't put that grid down on there.
Cool, it's a good set of tools.
Yeah, so don't forget about drape for things beyond its obvious use.
And there is more in there than just create a mesh, and smooth.
Yeah.
Smooth is the coolest named one, but
pretty cool.
There are some other things in there.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, one of the things that I've had lots of requests for, and we talked to several people about, is using these tools or using SketchUp in general to figure out things like cut and fill. So I have a building that I know I'm going to put into a landscape or into a terrain, and what I want to do is figure out how much dirt do I have to cut out for the foundation. If I have to build back up, how much fill dirt do I need? So what we're going to do, we're going to look at an example real quick that's going to show how to use solid tools to calculate both those numbers. So we're just going to go ahead and hop right in here. I have that same mesh we saw before, and what I did was I added a house to it. So right here I have this little building. I know, this is a grain of salt. This is suspension of disbelief time. This is probably not the ideal place to stick this house on the side of the hill. It's an extreme example. If we look at something with like a quarter grade, it's not going to be real exciting to see building it up and that sort of thing. So this is extreme landscaping we're doing right here. So what I did is I created a couple things. Here I have the house, so I'm just going to go ahead and hide the house real quick. And then I created two geometries, two solids actually. The first one is basically a solid that represents the foundation, or the space that the foundation is going to take up in the landscape. So this is the chunk that I want to make sure I clear all the dirt out of, because my foundation fits inside this. Below that, I have an exaggerated fill geometry. So the top of this geometry is the top of the foundation, and then I just have a grade filling out from there. So I just stuck these two where I would want them to be in order for that house to fit right on top. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go in and start by cutting out of the current terrain, and then I'm also going to figure out how much of this actual fill information I need to put the house right here. So I want to use solid tools for this. I'm not going to run through each of the solid tools, but we're just going to use those tools. One of the things I have to have, of course, are solids. So if I look at these, my proxy for the foundation is a solid. My fill proxy is also a solid, but my landscape right now is a locked surface, not a solid. So first thing I need to do is I need to make this into a solid. So I'm going to go through a couple steps to generate this real quickly into a solid. What this is going to need, it's going to need both my terrain location, or location terrain, and my location snapshot, both of these. You'll notice that when these come in, it always does, anytime you add location, it's going to lock them. So anytime you pick them, they show up in red, they show up as locked. Not a big deal. I can select them both, right click, and click unlock. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to project this rectangle straight up so it intersects this complex geometry. One of the things that happens when it creates this geometry inside of SketchUp is a lot of times this line will go slightly, like seriously, like fractions of inches off of this rectangle. So it will not be perfectly straight. So I can't just simply draw a line up here and draw a line up here and boom, have that close in as a perfect surface. Sometimes it works out, but a lot of times it'll be just slightly off. So the best solution I've come up for with this is I'm going to zoom underneath, I'm going to double click into my location snapshot, and I'm going to draw a rectangle. Draw the rectangle inside that snapshot. So it breaks the geometry. So here, and then I'm going to use push-pull to just drag that up through my landscape above, through that terrain. So I still have two groups. One's this big block. You get some really cool effects on the side. This is just bonus fun. And then I have my terrain right here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to select both of them and explode them. So now I have a bunch of geometry lapping over itself. I'm going to take a note from Josh, and I'm actually going to simplify what we're looking at by just turning off the materials right there. So there, now I have all these geometry intersecting. I'm going to right click. I'm just going to say intersect faces with selection. And what that's going to do, as I come around here, get rid of these extra lines, and I can select this piece right here, delete it, select this piece right here, and what I've created there is a solid of my terrain. So I'm going to right click and make that into a group, and what I should get right there, oop, it's not a solid group because I didn't close up there, When I intersected, I lost that bottom section, so draw a line there. Now we have a solid group. All right, so we're that much closer to cutting. So I'm going to go ahead, zoom back in here. I'm going to hide my fill geometry, and now I want to cut. So this is my template. I want to cut this shape out of the hillside. So I'm going to select it. I'm going to use the split command. When I use split and click on the geometry of the terrain, what it's going to do is it's going to break all three pieces so that they're separate. So I'll have one piece that is my terrain, one piece that is my geometry, and my geometry of my foundation, and then a separate piece that represents the cut between the two. So if I delete this group right here, I have what looks like just lines on the side of the building here, but if I use move to slide it up out of the way, that is my cut. That's what I need to take out of this hillside in order for my foundation to fit. And I can see right here by selecting it, it's still solid, and it tells me this is just over 4,500 square feet of material. I'm going to take that and slide it off to the side. That's great. So now I know what I have to cut out. But what do I have to fill in order to fill up the sides of the foundation and get a flat section there to build my house on? I'm glad I asked. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to unhide that last piece right there. This is my fill avatar. One of the issues I have with fill right now is the fact that it doesn't actually have the hole that I need to build into. So this fill actually is flat on the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that foundation back in. I saved it as a component so I can just drag it back into my model at any time. I'm going to grab it and I'm going to stick it right onto, oops, that's backwards. Flip that around 180 degrees and line it back up with my fill. All right, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to temporarily hide that. What I want to do is subtract this from this. So I'm just going to click on it, hit subtract, hit my fill. All right, I have a fill with a cavity. Unhide that last piece. And similar to what I did before, I'm just going to select this. I'm going to say trim it, and then click my geometry of my terrain. And I immediately know I did that wrong because my outline didn't change for that group. You know, you'd think for a 50% chance I'd get this right most of the time, but it just seems to be backwards. I don't know, I always seem to do this with, I don't know, there's some geometry or some logic there that just doesn't stick with me. All right, so I'm gonna try that one more time. I'm gonna select, no, I did it when I practiced. I got it wrong then too. So I'm gonna select the hill, and then I'm gonna say trim this solid group right here, which will then give me a new geometry, and this is my fill geometry. This is the earth I would have to fill in on top of this. So what I can do right now is I can look at this, I can say, all right, to do the fill, I need around 5,000 square feet, granted it's in feet, not cubic yards, and I'm cutting out 4,500, so I need to find 500 plus square feet to do all of this. So it's a quick and easy, granted it's not super hyper accurate, but it gives you an idea of the amount of earth you would need to move to put this house right back here on top of that location. So yeah, that's using solid tools to figure out how to move some earth around. Cool. I got one more time for another tip or two from the Topo Man. And I should point out too, if you guys have questions, I know some questions have already come up, but if you have other questions, specific questions about what we're talking about, throw them in the comments. Either one of the guys on the couch will answer it for you, or if it's good enough, if you have a good enough question, you might get on air. We'll thank you personally by whatever name you call yourself on Facebook. Kind of a big deal. So anyhow, back to Josh.
All right, I'm going to start with two things I wanted to mention when I was talking before, but didn't. So I'm going to jump into this group here, this topo group. And those are all those lines. Something that's worth knowing about, you don't have to use it, but you should know that you can simplify contours in SketchUp pretty easily with an extension. So let me jump over and show you where that is. Here it is called Simplify Contours. So Simplify Contours is actually made by the SketchUp team, but it is an extension you have to add. So take a look at that if you're curious about what I'm doing here. And I'll go back into SketchUp, and this piece here, if I do a triple click, I can select all that connected geometry, go to Entity Info, and I can see that it's 61 edges here. So if I go into, do that again, select all that, go to Extensions, and choose Simplify Contours, I can simplify this entire complex curve. If I say OK for 10 degrees, you can see it didn't change that much, but if I do a triple click now, I'll explode that first. Explode that curve, now do a triple click. That is now 6 edges. So if I undo that real quick, you can see it's barely changing. So 61 edges to 6 edges across a bunch of contour lines in a pretty huge model is actually a pretty big deal. In some cases it might extrapolate the wrong point and change the actual contour line, but that's worth knowing about if your model's getting huge and you want to kind of tackle this issue before you do any 3D generation of terrain. So just know you can do that. Of course, you wouldn't want to do that if you're really trying to keep the fidelity perfect from whatever line work you're starting with. So just know that's an option. Also, I want to talk about, I did mention this here on this, when I drape the grid onto this surface, it's useful to know that I can do a triple click, then a right click, and go to Soften Smooth Edges. And I can pretty easily choose Soften Coplanar, or dial this slider around to basically hide all of those lines that we don't need. Of course, they're still available in the hidden geometry, but you may want to soften and smooth that stuff. Okay, let's jump over to and talk real quickly about an extension called Topo Shaper. So I'm going to jump over back to my browser here, and actually, you know, one of the guys on the couch there will put a link for Topo Shaper. So this is the resulting thing that I'm going to generate now. But let's go to these contours here. So the point here is that instead of using from contours in the Sandbox Tools, I'm going to use the Topo Shaper extension. So I'm going to do a quick file save, and then now select all of these contour lines. And let's open up that extension. Again, that's called Topo Shaper. And this button here, I'm going to click on this one and minimize a few things. So we're not going to deep dive into this extension, but I'm just going to let it do its thing and see what it generates from those contour lines. So we'll say Calculate Terrain. And this is a fun one to look into if you're dealing with a lot of topography in SketchUp. And I'll just click to accept that, and we'll see what happened here. So the main thing I want to point out here is the difference between the surface generated with the SketchUp native Sandbox Tools and the Topo Shaper one, because they are different. So let's turn on Hidden Geometry, and we'll cruise down here. This one was the from contours in SketchUp, so you can see that if I zoom in, like I said before, every termination of a segment results in a polygon connection there. But if we take a look over at this one, and we really zoom in, you can see the topo lines actually kind of skirt out and in. If I go behind, it's not actually a perfect representation of those topo lines. So you may not care about that. It depends on what you're doing. But know that even though this is a better ordered mesh, I guess you could say, in some cases you may not want to do this. But if you do if you're affecting the geometry afterwards with other tools, that ordered mesh might be better. So I think the point is just that there's different ways of getting a 3D surface like that.
Yeah, if you're going to come back in there in this example and raise up that low point in the Topo Shaper map here, just like you showed us smooth, be able to bring up a nice smooth thing.
Yeah.
In the mesh that was created by Sandbox Tools, it'll actually kind of create a weird geometry. So
yeah. And that brings up a good point. I didn't say before about the Smooth tool is if you pre-select geometry, it's a different way of affecting that terrain, because it will act upon that selection a little bit differently. So you can see here I selected this piece first, then went to the Smooth tool, and so now if I pull this up, it's going to be more of a plateau there where I selected that stuff first. So that's a thing that people often miss with the Smooth tool, is you can pre-select geometry instead of just letting it do the circular mound adjustments.
Right.
Which is actually a lot better for accuracy. So
yeah, and like you said, if you want to keep one set of polygons together in the same plane, that's the way to do it, whereas Smooth Tool is always going to have some fall off with those movements.
Yeah. So last example, I'm going to go to a different file here, and let's pull that up. So I have a tattoo of some topo lines, and I thought let's throw it into SketchUp and see what happens, because I don't know what it would look like in 3D. So that's
this is the kind of thing you should really have SketchUp for.
Yeah. So basically what this is the freehand tool here. I traced over a trace of the tattoo. So we have a few degrees of error potentially introduced, but it actually looks pretty cool. So that's what I ended up with the freehand tool. And after I did the freehand tool tracing, I did a triple click on some of the edges and welded them so that they would be basically a polyline, are all connected. So if I do an orbit here and see they're all flat there, and then over here I just kind of guessed. I chose my own elevations for different parts of these topo lines and just kind of guessed about what I wanted. There's kind of a fish hidden here, so I've got like a little fish mountain. So I just was curious what it would look like, and it actually looks a lot cooler than I thought. So here is...
This is Josh in 3D.
Yeah, this is what the tattoo would be if it were a 3D landscape, I suppose. And I toss some water over here. Yeah, I think that's a place I'd like to go.
That sounds good. We take it with you everywhere you go.
Yeah. So this is nothing more than a random use of the tools, and yeah.
All right.
Can we see that tattoo?
Sure.
Yeah. Tattoos are for thugs.
Got too many topos today.
Well, we did have a couple little questions come by. Guapo pointed out that I did say square feet several times rather than cubic feet. That was what I meant. I don't know, just happened. I don't know. That's really the only thing I got there. Yeah, and Jack pointed out that Sandbox Tools was something we actually just released a skill builder earlier this week, showing how to use Sandbox Tools to make stuff that's not terrain. So there are other tools for Sandbox Tools as well.
Yeah, and also a good thing to look at beyond what me and Aaron just showed is a tool called Artisan. It's an extension. So Artisan is pretty cool. If you go to the warehouse and look for Artisan, you'll see a video right away. Play that video. That'll be all you need to know about it.
Yeah,
pretty easy to figure out what it does. It's a lot of control over the stuff we were showing today. It's kind of more freeform. Artisan's pretty cool.
All right. Well, since we don't have any burning questions coming in here, that means we did explain everything so well there's no questions left. That's how I take that.
Okay.
All right, I'll take. And then the question comes in. Thanks, Trevor. The extensions that people use for terrain modeling besides from contours, soap bubble or topo shaper. Those are the big ones that I would say. Really, one of the big things with that is the data that's imported. A lot of people don't go in and model geometry totally from scratch. They're working off of some other information. So really the question comes down to how do you get that data in? Do you import a TIN? Do you import a CAD file like Josh was saying? But most of those files are just geometry you import and build from there. And that's where something like Topo Shaper or From Contours comes into play, is generating the mesh based on that line information that's imported.
Yeah, and one thing I just thought about too, we didn't show this, but if you actually import a DWG file, you'll be prompted with some decisions if you haven't done this. There's things like preserve origin. So things like that, you do want to preserve an origin. If you're, let's say you're bringing in contour lines plus a building footprint plus roads or whatever, and they're different CAD files, you do want to preserve the drawing origin so that they're stacked properly.
Right. Yeah.
And then units, I think, is another choice. So if you are prompted with the choice of units, it actually is very important to know the units of that CAD file, because in SketchUp you may see some weird scaling if you pick inches and it was actually feet. So just think about that stuff.
Yeah. All right, well, I think maybe that's it. Oh, I thought somebody else was going to come in. I think we're good. All right, well, thank you guys. Thank you for bearing with us. We apologize for the rough start. This stuff just happens. So hopefully next time we'll start right when we say we're going to start.
Yeah.
And that's what we got.
Have a good Thursday.
All right. Thanks, guys.